Hey, what's up, guys? Chris Fluck here, Beyond Athletics Podcast. This is it. We're launching this thing here today. And, the goal of this here, the mission of this podcast right now is basically to create a healthy and positive community through athletics. And I talked about it on episode 1. And, as we were progressing our way through episode 1, I was talking about, what I was going to say in this first episode here, or technically speaking, the second episode. And it was going to be the coronavirus. It was going to be return to play. And, for the past couple months, I had all these great ideas for what to do for some of these episodes. We're talking about the benefits of sleep and how you can maximize, is there a gene that optimizes sport performance, all these different things. But then the world's on fire, literally. It's not the world, this country primarily. The coronavirus hits and it shuts a lot of stuff down. And then all of a sudden we have people, there's injustice, there's people getting shot in the streets, there's fire, protest, all kinds of craziness going on out there. So it's like, am I really at a good point to sit back and talk about returning to sports when there's mayhem and chaos going on? And I think back to this revivalist hymn that I've recently read, and it went a little something like this. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, dare to have a purpose firm, dare to make it known. And today what I want to be doing here is just kind of making a few things known. And some of this stuff and ridiculousness going on in the world, we're going to try to learn from this thing here. We're going to try to be a little bit, try to become a better person individually, and then hopefully the whole becomes a little bit better. And a few weeks ago, there was a story that broke about a man running in Georgia. And just today I was out running and I took this loop by our house. We have this little triangle that I run, and I live out in the country. I live on a horse farm, right? We don't really have neighbors. When you go out there and run these streets, people get out of your way. They wave to you, you wave back, you thank them for not hitting you, and that's about that. Nobody's following me out here. Nobody's threatening me. Nobody's calling the police on me. I'm able to go out and run these streets pretty safely and pretty, comfortably without having to worry about stuff. But then this case that happened in Georgia, this individual was a 24-year-old kid, and I'm starting to think about myself. What was I doing when I was 24? This young man, Ahmad, was a former football player. I'm like, I'm a former football player. I mean, I was never harassed by anybody, but I'm just thinking to myself, the aggressive mindset, that a former football player at the age of 24 might have had. When people are getting in fights, it's those college-age kids. It's that stuff. And now you throw in the fact that somebody is out for a run exercising, and now somebody's kind of behind them, and they're threatening them a little bit, and somebody might be recording them. And I was thinking to myself, how would I have acted in that situation? And then this car pulls up. This white truck pulls up, and they kind of cut the road off a little bit. And as that road's cut off, there's a man in the back of the truck. What the hell is he doing in the back? I don't know. The driver gets out. The Ahmad is running right at him. All right. All of a sudden, I think he sees a gun come out. This is my interpretation of it. I've only watched it a few times. My thought is this. He sees something about to happen, but he's in that fight or flight mode. He's already committed to the cause, and he decides he's going to run to the passenger side, and then he's going to try to run and maybe get that gun away from that driver. What happens? He ends up getting shot. And I'm thinking to myself, that could have happened to anybody. That's number one. And number two, as I was talking about this with some people, and I'm thinking to myself, this thing that these two people that call the police on him, they're thinking that, transparency is a real thing, that you could judge a person or you could judge a situation purely by the appearance of somebody. And it's not as a reliable indicator as we all think it is. And when we talk about stuff like this, where you're better, you're almost just as good flipping a coin in certain situations than you are trying to make that decision. And I think back to Malcolm Gladwell's books, Talking to Strangers, and he talks about the problems that people have communicating with one another. Just the other day, I was at a store, and I was joking around with the owner, and he's like, you're looking over here. You need something? And I was like, I was thinking the same thing. You were looking at me. Do you need something? And I was like, you see how? And then he said something joking. We were laughing. I'm like, I guess this could have went pretty bad there. You thought I had a problem. I thought you had a problem. I now understand how this communication thing works. And this transparency thing that we believe in, it's a myth. You can't just judge somebody. Hey, I saw a kid out there. It looks suspicious. We've learned this lesson many a times. I think back to another Malcolm Gladwell book in Blank, and he talks about that case in Philly about Amadou Diallo, a Ghanaian immigrant that is out at 12:40 at night. Cops say he looks suspicious. Then he goes up his house. They say that's an act of suspicion. Next thing you know, he's pulling out a wallet. He's got 19 bullets in him, 41 shots rang out, and we have a crisis on our hands. And when I think back to this stuff, just basically because these two guys, I don't want to call them idiots, but I'm just saying they had a big lapse of judgment. They thought something terrible was going on, and really it kind of backfired. And now those two men, they might spend the rest of their life locked up, and all because of that stupid decision. And I think of that protest, the stuff that went on in Charlottesville back in the day, where that one individual was 20, 21, 22 years old, and he decided to drive his car into the crowd. He killed somebody. His beliefs as a 20 or 22-year-old, where he's not even fully developed mentally, something he did then is going to ruin him for the rest of his life. That stupid act is going to totally destroy anything that he ever does beyond that, and it's going to be hard as hell for that person to kind of regroup if he so chooses to regroup. And so anyway, back to what's going on in Georgia. Dude's out for a run. You know, his heart rate's elevated. He's in that fight or flight mode. He's 24. I don't disagree with him for going after that person, especially if he's jacked up and he's feeling like these people are kind of messing with him and he's going to go confront them. This is not the first time somebody confronted somebody that was trying to do harm to him. I was watching a thing on Netflix, Trial by Media, and it was Bernard Goetz. This guy shot four black kids in a subway, and at first they said that, you know, he's a vigilante and these people were going to rob him and all this other stuff. But as it came out, he was kind of a heinous person and he had this ill intent. And, you know, he claims self-defense. And on one side of the fence here, you know, somebody sees this and they're like, well, if this man Bernard Goetz, he was defending himself and he shot these four kids. And then on this flip side, where this 24-year-old kid is running after a man in a truck, and then he tries to take a gun from somebody, he's trying to defend himself too. You know, not running away. I mean, you go run away, what's going to happen? You're probably going to get shot in the back. And this whole situation is ugly. And I wish there was more consistency in everything that was going on in the world, where you can't have it one way and not the other way. You know, everybody, they judge things, you know, not by their own merits, but according to who does them. If I do something, it's okay, but if you do it, it's not. And there's too much of that going on. You know, a lot of stuff too is like, all of these injustices, all of these things that go on, it just compounds and compounds and compounds over time. And now we got this situation we're in right now. And now it's like, how do we get out of this? And during this whole time, I was reading books. I read Animal Farm, George Orwell, which led me to read another one of his books. And it was a collection of his essays, and it was about the truth. And, you know, what he says in this thing as a writer is like, we shan't tell lies. You know, it's not exactly profitable to write and speak the truth, but you know, we need to fight to think freely. And if we don't think, and you know, like he quotes Voltaire, I detest what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. And we all have the ability to kind of say whatever we're thinking. And unfortunately, though, you know, we think freely, and it's okay unless it contradicts your viewpoint. And then that is when people try to seek to divide. And, you know, any kind of seeking to divide, any kind of, you know, trying to draw the line on one side or the other, it's kind of the act of the enemy. It's me versus you, and it's not about us, and that's a shame. It's a damn shame, kind of what's going on there. And like I was going on here too with George Orwell, this is in the 1940s. This is a man that grew up in India. But he was of English descent. His father was stationed in India, and he was saying, he was looking around at this imperialism that's going on. You know, the Indian people were basically indentured servants / I don't want to say slaves, but they were basically the oppressed in this as England kind of ran India. And he's like, England by themselves would never let another country do what we are doing to the Indian people. This imperialism, he witnessed it firsthand. He knew that that was a wrong. So he grew up with this kind of stuff. And, you know, he has this great quote in one of his papers. It's, everyone believes in the atrocities of the enemy and disbelieves in those of his own side. So in that case, he's like, oh, the Chinese are doing evil to all these other countries. Meanwhile, the country that he calls home is doing the same thing to another country. And, you know, I don't know what happened here. I don't know what led to all this, but you know, it's almost impossible for us to think that an opponent might be honest and intelligent. It's intolerable to think that somebody that has a different viewpoint, you know, just can't be right. It's like they got to be dumb. And I always go back to kind of that Voltaire thing where I detest what you say, I will defend to the death your right to say. Everybody has a right to say whatever they want to say. Everybody has a right to do what they want to do. And what we are trying to develop with this podcast here is now we got to create a healthy and positive community through the use of athletics. And it seems like a tall task. But if you stay with me here a little bit, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the world of sports. There's a lot of unity going on. We see this stuff. There's a lot of divide going on too now. And now we're starting to figure out you know, who is who and who we really are, and where where people align themselves, so to speak. And I want to start talking about some of these decisions that were made. I want to start talking about unconscious thoughts and unconscious feelings and our inability to read certain people. You know, all of this stuff is going on in our mind. It might not always be conscious. So for some of us, we might have these conscious feelings where we might, you know, disagree with somebody totally. We might not like them based off of how they look or how they feel. But then there's that unconscious stuff too, where it's like you have these feelings sometimes and you don't even know where they come from. You might be like, man, I almost just called somebody a terrible name, and you have to kind of stop yourself and think to yourself, man, why was that my reaction? You know, it's those unconscious things that happen in a blink of an eye. Those unconscious thoughts, I think, are what get people in trouble. I think it's what got some people in trouble in these current situations that we got going on, where some people are making these snap decisions and snap judgments, but they're doing it in a terrible way. And with this unconscious type of thinking, you know, we think about the quarterback who, you know, you remember Peyton Manning, who everybody talked about how he was this field general and he could kind of think without thinking because he saw everything before. And I'm thinking to myself, if we could train our unconscious mind a little bit to kind of perform better in sports and athletics, why can't we train our unconscious thought, you know, to be better to one another and to take care of each other, and to not have these ill feelings towards you know, people that might be a little bit different than us. And another important thing here too is that, you know, there's always that saying where it's like, if you want to change the world, start with yourself. And I unfortunately will be the first to admit that when all of this stuff was going on initially, I tried to rationalize this stuff a little bit and kind of downplay it at all, until I started watching these videos and started seeing some of the stuff that was going on. And honestly, like I was saying, you know, injustice compounds, and if this stuff just keeps going on and on and on, you know, things are going to get ugly. And I thought about that episode watching Bernard Goetz on Trial by Media on Netflix. And, you know, the mother of the one boy that was paralyzed, and I don't know if he eventually died there. I didn't finish that story, but she was like not surprised by any of it. A white man shot her son in the subway, and it was just like, you know, business as usual. She was used to that stuff in her community, and unfortunately, that's sad and that's terrible. And as I watched this, I was thinking, I'm like, this is nothing new. I mean, she literally might have moved. They had this massive migration from the south up into all these northern cities, you know, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, trying to find a better home. And then all of this stuff is still going on to them in their community, referring to in New York City on the subway. And just to see that woman's reaction, I was thinking to myself, that's pretty crazy. But anyhow, this is a part of the world that I don't even understand and know about. And I'm trying to, and I'm working hard on myself to try to understand things of that nature, because, you know, like I said, when I'm out here running these streets, I live on a horse farm, I'm out in the country, there's nobody following me around, and I got it pretty good out here. And I think it's our job then as individuals to understand where we are, where we feel we're doing well and not doing well, and try to make ourselves a little bit better. And if we can make ourselves a little bit better, maybe we can make our young daughter a little bit better. Maybe we can make the people close to us or other family members better. You know, there's a lot of evil thoughts out there, and I don't know where it stems from, but it's not going to go away. Evil's kind of a part of how we operate in this world, unfortunately, especially as human beings, and that's not going to go anywhere. So as I get into this stuff, you know, I talked about some of these Malcolm Gladwell books before, and it kind of led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole. And when you see some of these acts going on, there's always that opportunity. You know, I'm switching gears a bit into a different case, but you saw what happened in Minneapolis or in Minnesota, where, you know, there was a police officer had his knee on a man's back, and, you know, the attorney, you know, Eric Holder, I think he was a former attorney general. You know, he said as he's watching these passerbys kind of watch what's going on, he's poor trained. These individuals, these other cops, they were either poorly trained or lacked the humanity to get involved. They could very easily be poorly trained, and that's a problem that, you know, these institutions need to address. But lacking the humanity to get involved is something I want to talk about, because it's always hard. It's always hard to speak out, at least it is for me. And I don't know if I'm speaking for everybody watching this, but, you know, to have all of this stuff, every atrocity that ever happened, you know, I read a book called Ordinary Men, and it's about some of these Polish men that, you know, were just average guys. They were literally ordinary men, and they did heinous things, some of the worst stuff ever, to some of these concentration camps. We look at the Vietnam War and the My Lai massacre. One poor leader made a decision, and there was a chain of events that followed there. It's like once you get lax in one area, then something bad might happen, and then it'll compound that, just like the injustice compounds in some of these racial incidences. All of these decisions that you make they will compound, and next thing you know, you have the My Lai massacre, which is a heinous, terrible thing that happened in the Vietnam War. I think about, I remember reading about pilots, and there was, I think it was your Japanese culture, that you respected your superior to a certain point, that even if something bad was going on, you wouldn't speak out. There was all these plane crashes going on, and as they start investigating some of this stuff, the superior was in total control, and the person that was working underneath them was scared to speak out, even to the point that led to plane crashes. And there's that whole hierarchy thing going on there. So as you see some stuff going on, I'm not rationalizing anything here. I'm just speaking about human nature, and I'm no expert either. So just please, take that with a grain of salt. But, I've coached football. I've been on football staffs. I worked for other people. There's always a hierarchy and there's always a pecking order. And you would love to be that guy that always has the courage to speak up and speak out. You would love to be that guy that would tackle the person that's causing harm to somebody else. But you know what? Sometimes you just might not. And you might have to live with a terrible regret for the rest of your lives, like some of these individuals are going to have to. Do I think all of these people that do evil are evil? Maybe. But I also think some people might make a mistake and let things slip and let things go when they shouldn't. And all of this stuff just kind of compounds over time, and it leads to terrible, terrible stories and terrible, terrible instances. So as you are doing stuff, and I hope to keep this in mind, when you are working with different structures and setups, there's always probably going to be a hierarchy. It's kind of what goes on in this country. And I'm not talking about race or sex or anything like that. I'm talking about businesses. I'm talking about football coaching staffs. I'm talking about, that's basically kind of what I'm talking about. A family structure, so to speak, with the dad, the mom being in charge, then you have the kids, and eventually those kids make their own decisions, but they're always kind of a hierarchy there. And we need to be able to feel comfortable enough to speak out against those that are, in quotes, superior than us. As an assistant coach, if I see some wrong, you think about the Penn State scandal, and an assistant coach saw a former coach of his potentially doing something to some kids in the locker room. I'm pretty sure it's been confirmed that he saw something. And what did he do? He was scared to go in. I don't want to say he was scared, but he didn't do what you think somebody would do. It's because this man that was once a superior, somebody that he once looked up to, was just doing the unthinkable, and he froze and he didn't know what to do. And if you think that couldn't be you, you're making a mistake. This could happen to any of us. And we need to understand that as individuals, that, if we're not on, if we're having a bad day, and if we're not, if we're just not feeling good about ourselves, we might not step up and step in. And I think that's why it's important for us to take a look in the mirror sometimes and try to become a better person. All right. So with all of this stuff, there's always that compound effect, right? We talked about the injustice compounding, and I think anytime that there's a little slip up, you look in the history. It's all over the history books. Read Ordinary Men. Look up the My Lai massacre. And all you're going to see is one decision started, and then it was just a chain of events that just led to some ugliness. And then lastly here too, like I was talking about with the unconscious stuff, we need to be able to identify where maybe we have some flaws in ourselves. And it's not always blaming, we can't always blame, well, I guess it's not about blame. We can't always choose where we live, so to speak. You're born in a certain country, you're born in a certain town, you're raised by a certain amount of people. You can't choose these things, but we can't stop trying to make ourselves a little bit better in spite of your situation. And I think that is one thing that I hope, and I don't know how it's going to come of this, but I hope it does come of this. Just the fact that if you want to change the world, start with yourself. If your life is in shambles, you shouldn't be out there, trying to tell people what they should and shouldn't do. I don't care which side of the fence that you're on. Everybody has their own opinion. Everybody's allowed to say what they want to say and do what they want to do. And if you aren't in order in your own personal life, maybe you should get that in check first before you start trying to change other people's worlds. All right. That's one thing I wanted to talk about. The other thing is that just trying to better understand our unconscious selves. We all have our conscious thoughts, but let's try to be a little bit better about some of these unconscious behaviors that we do, that we're just like, wait, why did I do that? Where did that come from? Let's be mindful of that. If you're coaching sports, you might have grown, let's say you grew up with a guy and you didn't like that guy at all. He bullied you the whole time, and you're trying hard. You're like, what, his son's on the team, I'll treat him fairly. But consciously or there's going to be some disconnect. You're going to consciously say, I'm going to be fair to this kid, but you might have some ill feelings towards it. Every time you see his dad, you might take it out on the kid. Or if you are if you have an issue with somebody's background or an issue with somebody's race, you might say all the good things. Hey, hey, good job. Give them a high five. But you might treat them a little bit different because, and it might even be unconscious. You might not even know you're doing it. And I think we need to kind of get that in check a little bit, especially if we're working with kids, especially if we're working with the youth, and we're trying to bring everybody up, and we're trying to create a positive, healthy community. We need to be mindful of what we're doing unconsciously as well as consciously. And like I was talking about too, with this whole training situation, Malcolm Gladwell is probably going to talk about him a lot. He talks about things going on and the whole philosophy. One of these police officer specialists, he said we should follow the Hippocratic Oath, and our goal should be this, man. First, do no harm. This applies equally to law enforcement. It applies equally to the doctors in medicine, and it's equally applied, to those that are coaches. Number one rule, let's do no harm. If we could get past that point, if we could kind of keep everything status quo, and if we cannot do any harm and knock us back a little bit, then we could start trying to progress and go forward a little bit like that. And, always remember this. It's always going to come down to you as an individual. It's going to be very hard to kind of not manipulate. It's going to be very hard to sway and to encourage people to kind of follow a certain path if you're not living that life. So always make decisions based off of who you are. Number one, do no harm, like the Hippocratic Oath says. Number two, let's try to be a little bit mindful of our unconscious thoughts sometimes, and then maybe we could train ourselves to think a little bit differently. Number three, let's just treat people good, and let's try to create a good, healthy community. Get rid of this negativity stuff. Like I was talking about with George Orwell. Everyone believes in the atrocities of the enemy and disbelieves in those of his own side. We need to eliminate words like enemy. It's intolerable to think an opponent might be honest and intelligent. Why is it intolerable? Why is it intolerable? It shouldn't be. And then everybody's getting a pass too, like astrologers. This is Orwell again. Like astrologers can survive almost any mistake as long as they stay loyal to the cause. So, you know what? You might make a terrible mistake, but you know that your team's got your back, and they'll overlook it. Just like you're that weatherman that can't get the weather right. You know you got your whole team behind you. And lastly, I'm going to close up with how I opened here. Kids, adults, anybody. Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Dare to have a purpose firm. Dare to make it own. Don't be afraid to speak up. If you see outrage, if you see something that you don't agree with, speak up. Don't be a bystander. Have the courage to kind of say something and do something, because if you don't have the courage to speak up, we're going to get to these points here where we got these terrible things going on in people, terrible injustice in the streets, and then history, looking back, we've got the My Lai massacre, we've got, ordinary men, these Polish men during World War II did these atrocities, and as you kind of backtrack through everything, they're there, they're history, it's part of being a human being. Unfortunately, this evil does exist. We need to be mindful of it, we need to hold firm to who we are, and we need to get moving forward here. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. That was episode 2. The next episode, depending on what goes on in this world, is going to address returning to play for the coronavirus. Until that time, guys, I'll talk to you on Monday. Peace, everybody.